Hello and welcome to Cuppa with a doula. I'm your host, Alicia. I'm an exercise physiologist. I am a doula. I am a mum to two girls. And I am doing this podcast to help mums and parents out there to feel like they're not alone, to spread awareness of things that happen when birthing. I create a platform for women to safely share their birthing and their parenting story, regardless of where they birth, whether it's a hospital birth, whether it's a planned C-section, whether it's birthing in a birth center or birthing at home with or without a midwife. It's all on Cuppa with a doula. And every month I interview a professional in the field of pregnancy and birth. So far, I've had a student midwife, a birth photographer, a clinical nutritionist, a women's health physiotherapist, and Catherine Bell from the Birth Map. And now this week we have Sally Cusack from Maternity Choices Australia. And all these experts come and share their knowledge on the podcast in the aim of raising awareness to important things related to pregnancy, birth, and parenting. So thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, please consider leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts because it really helps me to reach more people and to help more parents and more mums out there. So please consider leaving a review or even sharing it, spread the word out there, Cuppa with a doula. If you want to come on the podcast, there is a form in the show notes that you can use to get in touch with me, and then I will get back to you and we can record an episode together. Let's dive right in. In today's episode, I am chatting with the lovely Sally Cusack from Maternity Choices Australia. For those who don't know Maternity Choices Australia, it is a not-for-profit organisation that advocates for women for their birthing rights, and the work they do is incredible. They are trying to help make change happen at a government level. They have been advocating for women to have more access to continuity of care. They can also help if you have been a victim of birth trauma, if you have had a bad birth experience, if something happened that shouldn't have happened in your birth. They can also help you to navigate how to lodge a complaint, how to report what's been happening, how to report the professional that's done that, and so on. So in today's episode with Sally, we chat all about women's birthing rights, how to be the best advocate you can for yourself, for your health, and for your baby's health. Also, we chat about a really important tool that Sally and her team developed at Maternity Choices Australia, the Best Birth Finder, and the link is in the show notes if you want to go and check it out. It is an amazing resource where women can anonymously leave a comment about their birth experience, whether it's in a birth center, in a hospital, or even if they birthed at home, whether it was with or without a private midwife. And the aim with this tool is to really capture the different birthing experience in hospitals. So women who might be seeking care in a certain hospital can go and have a look at what the feedback has been. But it's also a way to get a bit more of an overall view of how women are birthing in Australia. And again, this is in the aim to make change happen and to get the people higher up, the people that actually make the decision that can change legislation and so on, to really see what's happening at a population level, because usually they just don't see it. And it's really difficult to make change happen if it's just a handful of women that have had a bad experience or a certain experience. So the aim is to really capture a bigger picture and just have more data to present when advocating for women's birthing rights. So without further ado, I will leave you with this interview with Sally, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed interviewing Sally. Hi, Sally. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Alicia. Thanks for the invitation.
No problem. So, do you want to start by introducing yourself? So, telling the listeners your name, where you're living, and what you do for work.
Well, there's a range of things I'm involved in. My name's Sally Cusack, and I live in northern New South Wales in Australia. And I am currently the Secretary of Maternity Choices Australia. And I also am a co-founder of PBB Media, Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond Media.org, which is a citizen journalism project that I started with a group of women from my region back in 2010. Yeah, they're the main birth-related things that I do. I'm also a maternity services advocate, mostly in my region for my local health district.
That's right. That's important to mention, definitely. So, well, today we're going to focus on the work that you do and that Maternity Choices Australia does in Australia. So, I guess let's start by introducing who is Maternity Choices Australia.
Well, up until recently, we were an incorporated association, started over about 35 years ago. We've recently registered as a company limited by guarantee. And we're a national organisation that advocates for better choices for women in birth right across the country. So we advocate at the federal level and the state level and also the local government level. And we're volunteers, it's a volunteer-run organisation, and we have members across the country. These days there's quite a high concentration of involvement around Queensland, but we have members in Victoria and South Australia and Western Australia, all around the country.
Interesting. Wow. That's really cool, and we need more advocates. We need more people that can talk to local government and politicians and, state members, because that's how we get things moving, really. That's how we make change happen. And we know that there is more than a few things that could be changed about the maternity system in Australia, even though obviously, we appreciate that it's free, we get access to really good healthcare. It can still be improved for sure.
That's right.
I've also obviously been on your website, and I've also seen that you help women with advocacy in terms of obviously those women having had a personal experience, usually not a great one, and you help them with finding their ways through the complaint system or finding a way to have their voice heard. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Apart from just attending meetings to try and see evidence-based maternity care being implemented, we also assist women if they have feedback that they want to provide to their birth service. It's not always very clear to women how to do that, or even that what they've experienced is something that shouldn't have happened. It can take a little bit of time after the birth process for a woman to process what happened and to think, to have herself wondering, did it really need to be like that? Especially if she's pregnant again and looking for a different birth experience. But even just on the strength of what happened previously, it's of course well within her rights to pass on what she was or wasn't happy with about her birth experience. And in fact, birth services, many of them, they welcome that information. It's just that the pathway to doing that is not always clear.
Exactly. And that's something that's not, as you said, it is really difficult to find how to express your feedback. And especially when it's not a good feedback, it's really hard to find information when you go on your state health government website. So I guess maybe can you tell us what would be the first step in I guess putting in it's usually about a complaint. What would be the first step in putting in a complaint and telling, the maternity where you birth that something didn't go right, or you're really not happy about how the birth unfolded or the postpartum stay unfolded?
Well, there's a number of different avenues that you can take, but there is always a standard complaint process actually for every hospital that you can go through. And that can actually be found on the website of any hospital in the country. There's, especially for public hospitals, it's very clear, but they all have to have a formal complaints mechanism. And it's generally a web form that you can fill in, but there's also email addresses that are available on their website. So you can start there, and that's generally the consumer relations email address, something like that, where it's a generic feedback form for the whole service. But I think it's also good to write directly to the midwifery unit manager and the head of obstetrics and gynecology as well. But certainly you have to at least start with, it is good to at least start with that consumer relations type generic email address, and they're all responded to. It's not like you'll fall into some kind of bottomless pit and never get an answer. They're required for their registration to have a feedback mechanism like this, and one that is serviced and actively responded to. As to whether or not you'll be happy with the response is a whole other thing, but that's sort of how you get the ball rolling. And you would also ask, rather than just saying, this is what happened to me and I wasn't happy with it, it's also good to list how the service can be improved and what you would like to see happen. And also, if you have the energy for it, you can also offer to become a member of the community advisory group for the hospital. So that, as a part of having this mechanism for making complaints, all public hospitals, in order to be accredited, they also have to have not only this sort of email mechanism for receiving complaints, they also have to have groups that involve members of the community that they invite people into. And it's not just a one-off thing. You can become a member of the community advisory group, and it can be a generic sort of one that covers all the services across the hospital. You can also ask for, and it's possible that your particular hospital has a maternity specific group, which is valuable, because maternity care is supposed to be delivered in the so-called wellness paradigm, which makes it unique in the hospital system, because the vast majority of women going through that system are well. So it's just the overall approach is so different, or supposed to be so very different in maternity compared to, renal and cardiology and everything else. Hospitals should at least have a generic advisory group, and you can become a member of that and start agitating for change that way. And then if you're still seeking redress, it's generally a process. The first response that you get from the hospital may be pretty lukewarm, but it's also good to ask for a meeting. So not just to have them write back to you and say, oh yeah, we're really sorry you had that experience, we'll do better next time. It's also a good idea to build into your initial email that you want to have a meeting and to sit down and actually go through the issues with the relevant people, and not just have it brushed aside. So there's a number of approaches that you can go, and from there you can step it up and involve other women from the community. If there's a lot of women who feel the same way about what happened to them, you can then involve the local press. You can have a little rally outside the hospital saying, hey, we need our voices heard. Please establish some kind of community advisory group. We want to see continuity of midwifery care, or whatever it is that you're wanting to see. And your local members of parliament are useful for this as well. It can be a process. It's not just one letter, a goodbye, it's all dealt with. It's a process. Yeah, but it starts with that letter, with a simple letter, and ask for a meeting.
Yeah, that's some really valuable information that you're giving, so thank you. Because yeah, as you said, change is not it's not driven by the hospital, it's driven by the feedback that is given from women who have gone through the system. And that is how the hospital knows whether it's doing a great job or it's not doing a great job. And there seems to be feedback that's consistently saying we need more midwifery continuity of care, or we need more of this service, or we need more midwifery led care inside the hospital. That is how you get change happening. And we know that change is slow, but in the case of someone complaining about their birth, as you said, it starts with a simple letter, and then obviously the process it doesn't take place in 5 minutes, but getting the ball rolling and actually getting, also for the woman, getting some explanation, because sometimes that's what they're wanting. They're wanting explanation on what happened, why did it go this way, or someone saying, well, yes, there has been a mistake, and actually acknowledging that something that shouldn't have happened has happened, and potentially explaining why again. And also it's important to just give the feedback to the hospital to say, well, this wasn't right and this shouldn't have happened, but it has. Let's keep an eye on this so that it doesn't happen again, and it's not something recurrent that happens in the hospital.
Yeah. Look, the challenge I've been involved in this arena since 2009, and I've seen very little change. Well, in some areas some change, but in some areas we're no better, and in other areas we're actually worse off than 15 years ago, 14 years ago. But I think the big reason for that is that there's no time once you've had a baby to get on your computer and start trying to research how you make a complaint. You're straight away into the very, very busy, life-changing experience of raising this little baby or babies. And yeah, I mean, it's quite often not until your child is 18 months, 2.5, like sometime down the track when you finally catch your breath, and may even be pregnant with your second child, that you start thinking about, wow, did that really need to be like that? And I don't know if I really want to go into that experience again. So because of that, birth services are not very up to date with how women are actually experiencing what they have on offer. That I know they do these debriefs in the day or two after birth, but you're completely in baby world and maybe in deep shock from what you've experienced. And it can take a good minimum 18 months before you even begin to find the words to express what you went through. So, sitting down and writing a complaint it's for most women just not at all possible. So, as a consequence, they're very behind the times and not really, in these debriefs, when you give a debrief after a difficult birth to people you didn't know before in an environment that's not your own, and you're sore all over and you haven't slept, you're just going to say, oh, yeah, it was great, bye. Like, you're not really going to give them very much information. And I know they want it. They are looking for it, but it's not going to be super informative. And there are some schemes where they do, maybe touch base at the end of, like, if you're with a midwifery group practice, and they, will ask for your feedback after 6 weeks or so, but that's still very early in the piece. I think it still leaves birth services quite out of the loop. And this later, more informed, more processed experience is not something that health services have invested in trying to find out. So, there's not a lot of feedback that they receive. And women can also feel quite alone in their experience and a bit confused, and because the rest of the world is sort of gotten on with their lives after their births, however, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, and people tend to kind of brush it off like, oh yeah, it was just the birth, oh yeah, I just forget about it and I'm on to the next thing. But for some other women, it stays with them, especially if they're going to birth again. So, they are still wanting to process and understand, but it can be hard to find other women that understand and who are wanting to engage in that conversation. So this is where groups like Maternity Choices Australia, or there's also Maternity Consumer Network, or Human Rights in Childbirth, or Maternal Health Matters. There's a number of groups with overlapping interests but in the same arena. And connecting with groups like ours can help you feel like, oh, okay, I do actually have something to express here and something to try and understand as well. So they can be, great sources of information for filling in all of the weird gaps that you have in your understanding of your experience. Like, I did not come out of it like this glowing goddess I was kind of expecting, and, really loving motherhood and, feeling this strong sense of purpose and understanding and place in the world. And I'm not feeling that, and why. So you can just, connect with other people who've been through that same experience. And so that's sort of what's available to women out there, and really it's wonderful for enabling health services to really hear what women are thinking.
That's right. And something we're missing from, from the health system in general is once you've had your baby, you're discharged, and that's where, you kind of get lost in the system then. So you're basically pretty much on your own if you don't know about community services, which sometimes you're not told about. If it's, for example, your first baby, or you've just moved to a new area and you don't know anything, you don't know anyone, it's extremely lonely. And sometimes, some women can just go, well, what do I do? Who do I turn to for help, for questions, for debrief? Because as you said, when you've had your baby and you're still in the hospital, you haven't processed your birth. It's just happened hours, days ago maybe, but you haven't processed yet because it's too early, and obviously you've got your baby now, and there's life must go on, really. So it takes a long time to process, as you said, 18 months sometimes. And also sometimes you need feedback from other women, so other perspectives, because your reality, sometimes you don't realize it's not everyone else's reality, but that's obviously what you went through.
Yes, yeah. Well, there's also on our website, there is a lot of resources there about making other complaints, like even sort of going to legal action. So you can go beyond, of course, you can go beyond just the first step that I described before. And even, of course, going beyond, you may not want to have anything to do with the hospital and be part of any community advisory group, like it's not like you have to do that either. There are legal processes that you can pursue as well. But the first step is to always start with the initial contact with the hospital. And by the way, when you do go for your meeting, make sure you have somebody else there with you. And you can ask to record the conversation on your phone, or at least have somebody else there taking notes, because it can be quite overwhelming to go back to the place where it all happened, and you can be a bit sort of rabbit in headlights, not really functioning as quickly and on the ball as you'd like. So having somebody else there with you is important. Because of that delay, and then, for women making complaints, you end up with these diminishing numbers of women who are willing to actually do it, like 6 months, 12 months, 2 years later. So they end up getting a really small number of complaints. And you hear the stories in the community and you say, oh, have you sent them the that feedback? Because if I'm a member of our local community advisory group for our local hospital, but if I go and tell them these stories, they say, well, they've never written to us about it. We thought they were perfectly happy. So, I encourage women to write to the health service and give the story, but it does bring up the trauma. They're busy with their babies and their other children, and So, you end up with less and less women in there saying, oh, what's that email? How do I do that again? Oh, I'll do that tomorrow. And so you end up with a very small number of women who actually do it. So something that has been a dream of mine, of ours for a long time, is a system that enabled women to make complaints easily and also be able to see what other women think of their local birth services. And because you're really pretty in the dark if you are, especially if you're fairly new to an area and you think, oh, I'll just go to the hospital down the road, I'll wonder what people think. There's no reviews. It's not like buying a book on Amazon or something where you see the review. There's no reviews. There's, maybe a nice enough midwife who picks up the phone, but you could be pretty in the dark, even if you're from a community, but you're the first in your friend group to have a baby. So yeah, we have just built a system called Best Birth Finder, bestbirthfinder.org.au. That is a system that enables women to look at reviews that other women have uploaded of their local birth services. So you get a map of Australia and you can zoom in on your area and click on the reviews. And for the women who submit their reviews, what they also get is a draft template that's emailed to them with the sorts of points that you're going to want to make in your meeting and all the relevant email addresses. So our hope is that birth services are just going to start receiving more and more of these and, realizing, oh, it's not just 1 or 2 or 5 complaints a year. It's actually, we've got a whole bunch here that is all with similar themes and we really need to respond. And the other great thing about that is that I have found in just about every health service that I've ever had anything to do with as a consumer advocate, there's always someone in there who really, really wants the best evidence-based care to be provided. And they're just working away, beavering away really quietly in the system and helping where they can in one-on-one situations. And if they get wind of any agitation from the community, they will just really rally for you and really help push what you're wanting. So there's always an ally in there somewhere. It's not like the whole service is filled with people who don't care and don't want to know and too overworked. I mean, they are all overworked. The system does demand really more than what's humanly possible for each person. Like I think it's incredibly hard work working in the system. I could never do it. I've never studied midwifery and I won't. I have no intentions to. It's really full on hard yakka. It's such a misnomer now in the system to be a midwife with woman, because now you're with computer much more of the time than people working in the system really want to be doing. So they know the problems are there. So if they have feedback coming in from women with the direct experience, they can take this to their managers, who more often than not have no understanding or really much interest in birth and maternity. It's one of those really big cost centers and like, oh yeah, it's sort of, oh yeah, maternity. But if you're taking that information, it really helps arm these birth workers who are in the system and wanting to do the right thing. And I've seen change happen from that. So we need a top down, bottom up. We need both aspects to be working as much in synchronicity as possible. So when I'm saying bottom up, I'm meaning the community pushing and then the right people in the system grabbing onto the stories you're wanting to share, and they'll run with them and really can make so much happen. But so often the missing piece is the stories from the women. And so it leaves these people up here who want to help pretty disempowered. Yeah, so I'm excited about.
Yeah, it is a really good tool. I went on your website actually before it was redesigned, and it looks really awesome. It's really user friendly. And as you said, the main benefit for women, even if, they're not ready to share their feedback yet, or they haven't got a story to share, is the main benefit is really that that feedback that you're getting from other women, where you can actually know how their experience was at the hospital where maybe you're planning or you're thinking of, birthing there. Because otherwise, nowadays, how you find this information is on Facebook, or I should say social media as a broad umbrella, and you've got to rely on being in the right groups, being in the right community groups, and obviously other women seeing that post and therefore responding and being happy to share their experience, right? That's how you would get the feedback nowadays. So as you said, in the case of someone who is either new to the area or might be relocating, or those circumstances where maybe you're not established yet in the community, that can be really hard to get the feedback on the hospital down the road, to know whether that hospital is providing good services, what services, and so on, right? So your tool, Best Birth Finder, is amazing for that. And then, as you said, it's also making it easier to actually give the feedback so that change can happen. It's really easy to fill out this form and share your experience, and especially if you've had more than one birth at the same hospital, you've birthed at different hospitals, it takes only a few minutes to fill out, and it is great information for other women. It's great information for the hospital, and it's all confidential. There is no name associated with it, so you can be anonymous. You can just fill in the form, forget about it, and you're actually helping both your community, but also you're helping to drive change in a way, and that is really good. And thank you so much for having created that tool, because that is something we have been missing for a lot of years. So I'm hoping that, women listening to this, please put in your feedback. That would be amazing, so that we have more feedback, and you're helping your community, you're helping to drive change.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alicia. Yeah, I'm so excited about it, and we're getting lots of good feedback about it. It's an interesting process, but actually it's just on your point about anonymity. It's anonymous when you look at the public, when you're viewing people's reviews, but your data will be kept in your draft email. So when you send it to your hospital, of course it keeps your name and all of that stuff, so they can follow up your records, but none of that goes on to the public view website. So you're just seeing the sort of relevant points, like what you wished for your birth, what your outcomes were in the end, whether or not you felt you could say no at all times is another one of the things that we include. And there's lots and lots of different criteria, but it also accepts any kind of birth. So it's not like you have to have birthed in hospital in order to leave a review. It accepts any birth that's happened in Australia. So from free birth to home birth with a registered midwife to birth, all the different kinds of births that can happen in public or private hospitals. So, yeah.
Amazing. That is so good to know. That is so, so good. Yeah, because that's what I was going to say next is you don't have to have birth in what we call the system, being obviously we're talking here about the public hospital system. You don't have to have birth there. We know that the majority of women in Australia will birth in a hospital, but there is a small percentage that doesn't, and that Best Birth Finder tool encompasses those women as well, those women that have a precipitous labour at home, those that have a home birth, those that have a free birth, those that don't make it to the hospital, because sometimes you just don't. It's the whole spectrum, and that is really good to encompass everyone and not exclude anyone really. So the feedback is universal.
Yeah, we really wanted to make sure we had all the different ways of doing it there. Like, otherwise you don't know what's possible. Like, I think half the time women choose to birth in hospital because they don't realise that there are other options, like finding a private midwife and doing it at home. And the other reason too is that we are losing maternity services in this country. We have less now than we did 20 years ago, even 5 years ago. They're closing down. So like in regional areas and certainly in rural centres and in lots of areas, like Burke, for instance, in far west New South Wales, those women have to travel like a minimum of like 5 hours to go to Dubbo Hospital to birth there. I mean, what a disruption. How do you do that in labour? Well, you can't really. So you need to go down, I don't know, a week or two before. I don't know. And how do you do that with your other little kids in tow and your partner working and is your main support? And, your other support might be, your mother around the block or your sister and they're not there. So it's a real shame. And they're saying, oh, it's because of safety. And I just think, well, how is that safer to have a woman in labour hurtling down the highway? I mean, that's just not safer. And away from her support networks, that's not safer. Yeah, we are seeing like a centralisation of services and these smaller services closing down. And they need to hear about the births that happen on the side of the road, or from the women who just decide, look, I'm just going to stay at home. It's baby number 3. I'll just hope for the best. And maybe that's okay. Women are free to make that choice, but not all women are comfortable with that. But they do it because they don't really see a viable option. And, so the hospitals need to hear, like, the choices that women are making. And they also, if they do decide to travel all the way to Dubbo or, wherever it is they need to go, like in northern Queensland and the north of Western Australia and Northern Territory, like there's massive travel that's made, like massive, hugely disruptive, much worse than just 5 hours. That's just dismissed as, oh, well, that's just how it has to be. But women are coerced in that. They're coerced into those situations and can spend, 3 weeks on their own in some nasty hostel with, people they wouldn't ordinarily choose to hang out with, doing whatever they do in the corridors of these places. I mean, that's not preparing for birth. That's not safer. So, and there's so much that governments could be doing to be, reorganising resources and making safe care available near women's homes. And that's what 2 national maternity service plans have called for across all the states. And it gets largely ignored. It's supposed to be women-centred, meaning near or in the woman's home, not hours and hours away. So, yeah, so women get to say through something like Best Birth Finder. Of course, you don't have to use Best Birth Finder. Just go to the website and you can look up email addresses and, go through the process yourself, of course. But, I'm just hoping this enables more of this feedback that says, look, I did birth at this distant hospital, but it was really, these are all the ways that it was bad and made our lives more difficult. So, and especially when we know there are so many examples around the world of how safe remote birth care can be provided. Yeah, I'd just love to see governments kind of changing their minds around that sort of thing too, with more of this feedback.
Exactly. And that is something to hope for. Obviously, change takes more than, a year or two. So probably for, the next generation, or if not generations, but to try and improve the services, because we are a huge nation, obviously, and we have different states, but our population is birthing. Our population is getting pregnant and is needing maternity birthing services, and closing down maternity services in Australia does not make sense, because we know our population is growing. Why are we closing down health services just because, well, it's rural? That doesn't make sense. We know that those rural communities, they need those services more than, obviously not more than, people in bigger cities, but they need those services. And when you close them down, well, the next service available, as you said, can be hours away. It's not just, oh, you've got to drive an extra 30 minutes. It's it can be 5 hours or it can be 7 hours. And I've actually got a story coming up soon about a woman living in regional New South Wales who had to choose between birthing in a hospital that was about 4 hours away from her or not having access to a hospital, and therefore she chose to free birth. Because that decision isn't just, oh yeah, I'm just going to free birth. It's almost a decision that's made for her because of the lack of services, not because she really wants to have her baby at home. Talking about different types of birth, right, and women either not knowing what birth is available to them or what birthing option, or, choosing to birth in a hospital because that's where they feel safest and that's where they want to go. What can women do to empower themselves to be their advocate so that, they feel respected, they feel heard, their voice is heard in the hospital system? We're talking about they have, birth preferences, they do want stuff done or they don't want certain things done. How can they do that in the system? How can they be heard?
Well, there's lots of things that you can do, but the first thing is to be aware that when you walk through those sliding doors of the hospital, you are entering into their space. And that just will influence how assertive you are, how willing you are to ask for what you really want or to say no to what they're wanting you to do. It's quite incredible how socialized we are we are socialized to be compliant, especially as women, and especially when we're feeling so protective of this new life within us that's growing and that's so precious. We don't want to do the right thing, and we're in this entirely new, if it's our first baby, well, even with other babies, with each one you're concerned and you're wanting to do the right thing, and each pregnancy is a bit different and with its own set of challenges. So we do need to really sort of understand how that socialization, the natural socialization that we have for compliance, and the foreign nature of being in that environment with, these experts who we find ourselves deferring to it really will influence how strongly how confident you are in asking for what you want. Like, you've just got to accept that like, you really are likely, without that awareness, you really are likely to just roll over like a little puppy and, pretty much do what's expected of you. Because like one of the big reasons for that is not only what I listed before, like you feel like you're with these experts who know about it all so much more than you, but you're afraid of making the wrong decision and in any way impacting the future health prospects of your baby, of course, but also yourself. But you mostly are just worried about the baby, and
exactly.
That leaves you in this very vulnerable position, and you don't want anyone getting a little bit ticked off with you, a little bit kind of like, she's a bit difficult, I'll just ignore her a bit, or I'll just take a little bit longer with somebody else, or you just worry about this, and you don't want to do anything to jeopardize getting the best of the best for your baby. And so you really do become the most compliant schoolgirl that you kind of go back to being 5 years old. It's like with some of it, it's really important to understand that dynamic and that it will be at play, but there are ways around that. One of the best tools, the simplest tools that I can remember, that comes to my mind if I'm ever seeking any kind of medical care or second opinion, is to remember the BRAIN acronym. Sometimes people use BRAND. I tend to use the BRAIN one. So B for benefits, R for risks, A for alternatives, I for intuition, and N for nothing. So what are the benefits of what are you suggesting? What are the risks to what you're suggesting? What are the alternatives? What does your intuition tell you when you take a moment to think about all of this? And what if we were to do nothing? Or do we have to do it now? And if
Mm-hmm.
when you invariably, when you pose those very simple questions that midwives and doctors themselves are well aware of these, it's, these sorts of questions they're on Commonwealth government websites and the Choosing Wisely website, it's an international movement that encourages patients in any area of health to be applying this sort of acronym when they get any healthcare, because it's well understood that if you, in like, as I say, across all areas of health, if you simply do what your doctor says, outcomes aren't as good. Outcomes are better when you do things like ask these 5 questions. So that can just really, and to also realize that most of the time, like, it's really, really rare to have to make a decision instantly. It's very, very rare. There's, even if they're saying, oh, you're 41 weeks and baby needs to be induced and, whatever, lots of different reasons, baby's looking really big and you're looking really tired and the anaesthetist is here today and, we can just kind of get started with all of this now. You can always just say, thank you for all that information. I'm just going to go away and think about it. And the other thing, of course, is to understand that without information like those, benefits, risks, alternatives, etc., without that information, you're not giving them informed consent, which is what's legally required. No practitioner can administer any kind of treatment or medication, or certainly not surgery, without informed consent. Otherwise, it's assault. And they get in big trouble for that. Now they'll try and coerce you, or sometimes you may feel this level of coercion, and this is where coming back to these things really, really helps, and for you to realise, even though I'm being told it's 42 weeks or time is ticking, it's very rare to have to go, yes, quick, we need a decision right now. There's almost always the time. So, and so that information is really crucial. Otherwise, you're not giving informed consent. And women aren't told about that. Like, when they go through those sliding doors, there is a general kind of, there is a pretty much a sort of conveyor belt that you step on, and they try to make it as compassionate as they can make it. But that is the reality, because they do have lots of people to service in a short period of time, not enough workers, all sorts of constraints coming in at all sides. They do just want to cookie cut you through the process. So I think that's another really important thing to acknowledge, that it isn't, as the system isn't set up for catering to every individualized desire of yours. They will do their best, especially if you have carers that are really wanting to provide women-centered care. They really will try hard, but the system is cash-strapped, and it's got lots of constraints, and they are very concerned about medico-legal liability. So they will do what they can to standardise what they offer, and because that standardisation is protective on their part, but it's not necessarily in your best interests. So, they've got this sort of level of care that they want to provide you, and you have a series of desires that you want, and they will, at some level, overlap. If you're doing like a little Venn diagram for yourself, those things do overlap. It's not like they're, Venus and your Mars or whatever. There is some overlap, but there's less than you might be aware of. And it's really it's good to try and really try and understand that point where the overlap part separates, and where they really will stand. And one way to get a feel for that, like, that's something you won't really get a feel for in your first or even second and third visits. It can take some time, but you can ask questions like what their induction rate is, or what their cesarean rate is, or their episiotomy rate. that sort of thing, about the levels, the rates of intervention can be a bit of a, it starts the conversation. And also if you hear them saying things, if you hear staff saying things like using the word allow, so we will allow you to go to 41 weeks and 3 days or something in your pregnancy. It's not actually for them to allow. It's for you to accept that. And you need to be, in fact, better than just accepting what they offer. The best thing, as Catherine Bell, who is part of our team but also doing her PhD and amazing work, she's written a book called The Birth Map. If you haven't spoken to Catherine already, you need to talk to Catherine. Catherine talks about informed decision making rather than just informed consent. It's important to really look at that distinction, because informed consent, it has this sort of passive feel to it, because it's like you're being offered these things, which one will you take? Whereas informed decision making is more proactive on the woman's part. She's considering her options, going away, thinking about it, and then deciding. There could be a combination of these things or something altogether different. And then it's up to you to decide. And I know it's difficult. It can be very difficult. We're so worried about this little person or people that we're growing inside us, and we want to make the best possible choices. And it can be overwhelming. I mean, I remember wanting to just hand it over to my midwife and say, well, what do you think? Like, I don't know, I can't decide. And she would never make the decision for me. It was so dementing. But, I had my first birth was in hospital, and my second birth was at home with a registered midwife. And it was the registered midwife who, she would not tell me what to do. And much as I wanted it to. And whereas the hospital, they sort of just, guide you that sort of way by saying, oh, this will only be available on this day, and it's only this particular midwife who, and only if you get that room will you get water birth. And so, you sort of, the system kind of has you moving along a certain path, and there's actually less options in a way. So, but, really, as difficult and as much as you may not want to make decisions, I recommend that you just get over that, because welcome to parenthood. This is the beginning of many decisions. So, like, you'll be making decisions on behalf of this little person for at least 18 years or 15 years or, however long, a bit less with my teenagers that, with their attitudes. But, it's sort of, you've got to be making difficult decisions. This is the beginning. And so, what really helps me with any kind of medical decision is not only that, these 5, the brain thing, but really taking up the time to then go away and drop into my intuition and do whatever it is that you do to help you make decisions. Is that just going for a swim or a long walk or journaling or just sleeping on it, discussing it with your partner or, experienced friends, getting a second opinion, doing your research? The internet is amazing. Podcasts like this, hearing different perspectives and giving yourself the time to really drop into what is aligning for you. Anything that's feeling like way out of left field and like you can't decide, that's probably a good indication that it's really not for you, or that you simply don't know enough and you need to just go off and research more about, whatever the treatment is, the gestational diabetes, or, read about it, find about and how much risk really is there for you with developing whatever condition it is they're trying to test you for? Yeah, if you look into that, you may kind of realize, God, I'm so low risk for that. It's just not going to really, that wouldn't have been on my radar. So I won't do that one, but maybe this one I will do because I have some history with whatever. So the main thing that I think, just to sort of finish up my rather long-winded answer to this, is that when you adopt an approach like, brain and giving yourself the time, you're making a decision based on information, and you're, as Catherine would say, you're even deciding. You're not just agreeing, you're deciding, actively stepping into a choice. And you've dropped your fear and confusion because you're informed. So look, you may still be a bit nervous, right? But you're less likely to be making a decision based on fear. If you're afraid when you're making a decision, it's a really disempowered decision, I have to say. Like, it's not going to be your finest hour. Like, there's a good chance you'll live to regret it. I really encourage that, and to be aware that fear is quite a, there's quite a soup of fear that's in the air when you go into a hospital, because they do deal with big situations. Am I going on too much here, Alicia?
No. Keep going. No.
Keep going. Yeah, there is a real climate of fear in our society. So that's something else to really understand, that, we're afraid of all sorts of things. And, the last 3 or 4 years hasn't been any help with COVID. So, there's just a lot of concerns going on in the world politically, and electricity prices and home prices and all sorts of challenges that we're facing, especially young families. But I think, like, fear in birth, like, it's got its own particular place on the bookshelf, hasn't it? Like, there's just, generations now. Like, there's intergenerational trauma around birth that goes back.
That's right.
A long way, I mean, I think I can kind of go back. It sort of changed even like around, say, my grandmother's time, but I'm a lot older than you. I'm 54 now, and my grandmother was birthing in the 30s and 40s, and it changed during the war. She was in England, and her first babies she just had at home. She would, like, just a lady from the village would just come and help, and in rural England, and But then her husband was an officer in the army, and so it was considered all a bit sort of backward to be doing that. And so she started with her last couple. She had a string of babies, but the last few were born in hospital. And I never got to talk to her about this. She died when I was very young, but it sounds like they were really bad experiences. And, one of them, not good, and unnecessarily so, it seems. Like, here was this very experienced woman that had at least 4 or 5 babies just at home before that. So, but they know better. So, there's intergenerational trauma, and I was then born into that, and then I took that into my first birth. And there was no one around me, or very few voices saying, oh, it's hard work, but you'll get through it, and you may even actually have a joyful experience. There weren't many people giving me that message. If I listened carefully, and when I look back, there were some women quietly going, oh, it was actually really beautiful, when all the rest of the women in the room were going, oh my God, it was dreadful, and damn near towing and two, and all the, all the sort of horror stories. So we're born into that, and our mothers, and we have this strange way of repeating our own history. And so, all of that, just kind of being aware of your own story in, how you were born. The rates of cesarean have been going up since the 80s and 90s. And, so many women now who were born by cesarean section, they didn't get their first rite of passage, and they're having to somehow, they get through it. Many of them, of course, many of them do. But I think mostly through being informed of these influences and how the influences can affect. And then you can, part the waters and kind of come to have some understanding of it for yourself. And there's some wonderful resources to do with becoming aware of your story and how influential it is when it comes to being in the birth room, such as Birth Into Being. A friend of mine, Nicole, runs this wonderful service called Birth Into Being Australia, and it's about rewriting the imprint that you have of birth prior to giving birth, but you can also do it even after birth. You know, you can
Yeah.
heal from your own birth experience and
Yeah.
from previous, you know, from your other actual giving birth experiences as well. And also, I happen to be reading this book, Beyond the Birth Plan, by Rhea Dempsey.
Yes. Yep.
And this is a wonderful book that goes through all the,
Yep.
she really explains the context that we're giving birth in, you know, the one of fear and hospital as the default, but also, you know, the influences of our family, our partners.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's there's a lot that it's, you know, because any kind of unresolved trauma or any of those unsaid conversations with your partner or whoever's going to be, it's really important to understand who's going to be in the room with you. That's really important, because anything unresolved there is going to be front and center in the birth room, and it really can impede your process, unfortunately. So, or maybe fortunately, you know, it's good to try and clear that so that you don't bring that into your new role as a parent to this brand new person who doesn't need all this legacy history. They, you know, of course, they want the good history, but so this sort of really understanding how you'll be influenced is, you know, so important. But nobody, like most women, have no idea. They think they're stepping into this totally expert environment where they know the best thing and it's the safest option and all of those things. And it may be those things, but so much of the experience you end up getting there ends up being up to luck, good luck in the end, like just whether or not you've got this really fabulous midwife that just happened to be on duty. Or did you get this really cranky one who has been on duty for 12 hours and really needs to go to bed and has some, you know, bad situation at home going on, or, you know, whatever, or they're hungry, you know. It's really luck of the draw. And, you know, and for them, it's just when they're working in those difficult circumstances, it can just be another day in the office, which is it's just so kind of wounding in a way to share something so deeply intimate, and you don't even understand yourself until you're in it at that moment. You could have been going there for 7-8 months or whatever through the course of your pregnancy and think that you've developed some familiarity with the place. But if you're attended by someone you don't know, which for most women is how it goes, who's tired, who's running between 3 or 4 other women, they don't want it to be like this. But, you know, for you, you know, you sort of want to be able to treasure the experience with someone really special, and you don't really realize that until it's going on. And it is really profoundly disappointing, or what's the word? I don't know, but it's such a sacred moment. You know, in that moment when you're pushing a baby out, you are the center of the universe in that moment. And then the person who's standing there beside you is there snapping their gloves on, kind of, hurry up, you know, how you going, you know, snapping the lights on or whatever. Like, it's like such a disconnect of, you know, instead of the coming together of all of nature's forces. It's so you really want to try and find continuity of carer. So, and when I say carer, I'm meaning like really trying to keep it to 1, maybe 2 or 3 at the most people. And you want those people that attend you to really understand, to have a very, very solid grounding in physiological birth. Yes, you may be requiring all sorts of the whole suite of medical interventions. You may even go into that understanding, yes, I'm going to be choosing an elective cesarean for series of reasons, but you still want someone with a solid grounding in the physiology of birth, because that also means breastfeeding and bonding, skin to skin, keeping the baby with the mother-baby dyad. You know, what an incredible synchronous, there's nothing else like it, the mother-baby dyad on this planet, and there's many examples of the mother-baby dyad, but that we exist because of the dyad, how dependent they are on each other. There's the beautiful feedback loop between the two of them that's life-sustaining and that is healing for both of them, and it helps them adjust to this new life together. That requires a deep reverence and knowledge of the physiology of birth and the birthing hormones and how to best protect the release of birth hormones. And unfortunately, just continuing on with your question about protecting yourself going through the hospital doors, the best way to have the best possible birth there is to also understand that, as Dr. Sarah Buckley puts it, she's the author of fantastic books like Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering, but also her PhD thesis, which you can download. It's this amazing work called The Physiology of Childbirth, I think it's called. But Dr. Sarah Buckley, she talks about the importance of feeling private, safe, and unobserved. That's the way to give birth safely and efficiently. If you have those feelings, I know this sounds wishy-washy, but if you have those feelings of being private, safe, and unobserved, your limbic brain at the back here, the lizard brain, the oldest part of our brain, will release all the right birthing hormones in the right cocktail, in the right sequence, so that bang, 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 all that's meant to happen will happen in the right sequence and efficiently and as painlessly as possible. Now, if you think about feeling private, safe, and unobserved, there's sort of, if you try and sort of imagine, where do I feel private, safe, and unobserved? Well, think about how you felt when you conceived the baby. So the two of you had to feel pretty private, safe, and unobserved, right?
Yeah.
So you want to try and foster the same kind of intimacy, the same darkness, the same quiet, the same spaciousness, and to feel safe, feeling safe. So trying to, visualize how that can be achieved in hospital. Now that is actually a challenge. And I think like one of the main things women need to know, apart from all the other things I've said, is that they need to think about, okay, so when I go into the hospital, it's going to be this brightly lit room, and yes, they can turn the lights off or down, but they tend not to have dim lights. It's either full bore or, maybe the little light above the bed or something. And so maybe that's helpful, but there's no lamp, there's no sort of, like they're sort of neon lighty, or LED lights or whatever. They're not that warm light. And so if staff come in and want to do cervical checks or whatever, it's the lights are on, and they can work around it if they're being sensitive to you and not in too much of a rush. But there's all of those things, like really, and there's stainless steel, there's tiles, there's this big high hard bed right in the middle of the room, like a stage that you're on or something, and the smell of antiseptic and strangers that can come in and out of the room. Weird, if people having phone conversations outside your door. It's not private, safe, or unobserved there. It's all about, safe. They're trying to make it safe, but at the cost of all of these other things, So their idea of safety doesn't include those other feelings. Their idea of safety is having epidural on tap and a fully functioning operating theatre, and all of which can be very important. But they're not the fundamental things that you have to have, actually. So, and as for unobserved, well, they're all about observing you every 20 minutes. They want to look at you and do something, monitor you, strap the CTG monitor to you and have you, and it's not private. Your vitals are then up on a screen in the, main staff room, or not the staff room, wherever it is, the central station, the midwife station. Yeah, there's not a lot of privacy, safety, or safety in the sense of feeling safe. You feel on public display, and not a lot of being unobserved. So, it's important to understand that the hospital, without you taking very careful steps, is contraindicated for efficient birthing, because you won't be feeling private, safe, or unobserved. Having said all that, it's not impossible. Many women have wonderful, peaceful births in hospital. So that is totally possible. But that is because they have prepared, or they are incredibly lucky with the birth space that they're in, with really onto midwives and lovely dim lights and lots of privacy and giving women lots of time. And But that's generally in, you're only generally going to find that in a setting where there's continuity of care with midwives who understand your physiology, understand how birth needs to unfold, and just delight in supporting that process. So the average hospital, the average busy city hospital is not really set up for that. So you need to bring for yourself little lamps or something, and have your birth support, if be that your partner or whoever it is who's coming with you, fully understanding the physiology of birth and what you're needing, and that you don't want to turn on monkey mind up the front here, the neocortex. If that's ticking away and answering questions and exposed to light and thinking and worrying and looking on your phone and, timing your contractions and things like that, that will turn this off. So feeling private, safe and unobserved is really, really important. I once interviewed for our radio show this woman who is a biologist, and when she had her child, she and her husband were both biologists, and they're like, right, okay, well, we're just mammals, so we'll just do what mammals need, and so they need to be in the dark and to not have strangers talking to them and interfering. But they chose to birth at the local hospital, and it was just her and her husband, and she had this huge black eye mask on, and she did not take it off from when she left the dark of her bedroom, getting in the car, driving through the city into the hospital, and then through the corridors of the hospital. She just had her husband guide her, and she wouldn't talk to anyone, and she just kept it in the total darkness. And when she got there, the midwives were like, oh, yeah, first baby, you'll be ours. And within the hour, she was pushing, and her husband's calling out, and they're going, oh, no, but eventually someone could hear, those classic bearing down noises, and they came rushing in at the last minute. So, that, she said, I just knew that keeping in the dark and not talking to anyone, and those two really simple things protected her process. So that, and she had a wonderful birth. So, you just need to understand we are mammals, and, we just need those basic things to be adhered to, and then pretty much the body will just take over.
Yeah, that's right. Those are essential message, what you've said. You've summarized it so well. Couldn't have said it any better. The hospital has guidelines. The hospital is not giving you a personalized experience. It's there to follow its own rules, to protect itself, to have its own back, so that you don't sue the hospital, pretty much. So therefore, when you come into the hospital, and as you said, you can have a really great birthing experience in a hospital. You don't need to, remove yourself from the hospital if you don't want to, just because, my birth is going to be bad, No, you can have a really good experience. But as you said, it's about being informed, and it's about pretty much, when you step through those doors, you have to tell them how it's going to be. And obviously, they will tell you that you can't do that. You can't go past 41 weeks. You can't do this. You can't have that. And it's about proving to them with research, or, going, well, what are you going to do if I present to you at 41 plus 3 and I'm in full-blown labor? Are you going to send me back? Probably not. You probably have a duty of care at this point. So if you know your facts, if you've done your research, and as you said, if you ask the questions about benefits, risks, alternatives, you follow your intuition, and you always follow it regardless of what the hospital system, the midwives, the due date, the, gestation, whatever that's saying, you follow that, you will be fine. You just need to be assertive. And when you're in labor, probably this, assertiveness and telling the hospital how it's going to be, that's probably handed over to your birth partner. So therefore, they need to be on the exact same page, and they need to be strong-minded, and I don't want to say ready to put up a fight, but they will have to defend your grounds potentially. So they need to know the research, the evidence, saying, no, she doesn't want a CTG on because she wants to be able to move. So we are not putting a CTG on. The other thing that's interesting about the hospital is they will tell you how it is until you start questioning it. So in my personal experience, I was told with my first pregnancy, I couldn't go past 41 plus 3. So I said, well, that's really interesting because that's a very precise number. Who decided 41 plus 3? What about if I'm 41 plus 4? And so the more I questioned it, I bargained myself and I got an extra 2 days. So I got 241 plus 5. And then I said, okay, well, that's interesting because now you've just changed your answer. So now I have no trust in you because, well, if you're giving women a different answer, well, I'm not trusting you now. So that's really stupid. But it's all about, my point is, it's all about saying, well, if you don't ask questions, you get told answer A, which is, apparently 41 plus 3. But if you start questioning it, somehow you get further along, right? And then you get allowed, and I'm putting big air quotations here, you get allowed, I do not like that word, to do things differently. I don't like when, as you said, when healthcare providers say, we allow women to do blah, blah, blah. That is such a big flag because at the end of the day, the hospital, the staff, they can't do anything without your consent, without you saying yes. They cannot do anything to you. Sometimes it happens that they do and they do not ask for consent, and that is not normal. That is assault there, and that should be reported for sure because informed consent is what every health professional in the hospital has to abide by. They have to ask, are you happy for me to do such and such? Now, when they say that, you don't have to, if you think, I'm actually not sure what they're asking, or I don't know what this procedure is or whatever, you can say, I need more time, I need to think about it. Your birth partner can say no, or can say, what about if we wait? Again, coming back to this whole brain, acronym about doing nothing or following your intuition. And usually, as you said, when they talk about something is urgent, there's this emergency, well, usually it's not, because if we look at emergency C-sections, it's only in the name because then they classify C-section by categories. And sometimes your emergency C-section takes place 3 or 4 hours after it was deemed emergency. So where's the emergency there if you can wait 3 hours for your baby to be delivered, right?
Yeah,
so,
there's a lot to bear in mind with the language, isn't there? That, emergency
exactly.
is thrown around a lot. It's, they're generally unplanned rather than emergency.
Exactly. They are. Exactly. Yeah, because I spoke to a student midwife who said basically a category 1 emergency C-section, which is your classic, the baby needs to come out right now because the mother or the baby's life is at stake right now. It's not I think that's what we hear when we hear emergency because of the language, but that's actually not the majority of C-section. The majority of C-sections are actually ones where they're a category 2 or 3 or so on, and they're non-urgent. Basically, they can wait. There is a factor that somehow means that the baby needs to come out via C-section, but if you can wait 3 hours, where's the emergency there, right? So there's a lot of language where, as you said, we as women, we're going to have to make so many decisions as future or current parents. So we need to start with obviously our pregnancy, our own care and our baby's care, like newborn, unborn baby care. And we need to just take a step back and not listen to, not take what the hospital is saying for granted. Yes, they are experts. They have studied, they've done extensive studies and placements and so on. But the only person that knows their body the best they can is you, because you live in your body and you feel the sensations and you feel physical. You've got physical sensation, you've got obviously emotional sensations, and you've got your intuition. No doctor can feel that for you. So yes, they have knowledge, but they don't have the feelings. And so therefore, that means, yes, you don't have to say no to every single doctor and go against everything they say, but what they say is not always, the absolute and only truth. You can question it and you can say, oh, okay, can you tell me more about why you would recommend this test or this intervention? Or again, when you mention about asking early in your pregnancy about the rates of intervention, C-sections, venous use, episiotomy, that can be a really important thing to discuss, because then you can say, oh, why is your rate of episiotomy so high? Why is it 30%, when we know that usually most women can birth without an episiotomy? And asking about those rates and looking at things like induction rates as well can help to put the pieces together of the fact that maybe towards the end of your pregnancy, it may look like the hospital will push an induction on you, or they will try to, because if you are informed, you can decline, or you can push an induction date, or you can bargain and say, I'm not going for an induction. If I have to do anything, I will do a monitoring. That's it. That's all you're getting out of me. But other than that, I'm happy to not have an induction, and you can't induce me without my consent. So we're just staying where we are now. It's all about being informed. And to me, it's about telling the hospital how you want to birth. And there can be some pushback sometimes, or you're lucky to find a midwife or an obstetrician that's super woman-centered and is really happy to, listen to your preferences. That is amazing and rare. But otherwise, it's about telling them how it's going to be, and also asking questions and not taking everything they say for granted for what it is. They're only humans, and you know your body better than them, obviously, because it's your body. They're not in it.
I agree with all of those points, but one thing I would say is that when, as you will remember with your first pregnancy, at the end of your pregnancy, the last thing you want to be doing is putting on your boxing gloves and going in to fight for what you want. Like it's really not what you want to be doing. So that's why continuity of carer is so important, and really trying to find the right carer. If you're wanting a carer, not free birthing, if you're wanting someone with expertise, make sure they have the right expertise. If you want surgery, hire a surgeon, as the saying goes. And so choose an obstetrician that is really excellent at cesarean section, and they have very low risk rates and injury, with all the injuries that can happen with those procedures. But if you're wanting a normal vaginal birth, then you need to find someone who is experienced in that. And there aren't very many. They are around, but there are not many obstetricians with experience in simply sitting on their hands and just observing and staying out of the picture and not meddling as an undisturbed birth unfolds. You want to find someone who is very experienced in normal birth. So that, when you come to transition, for instance, and you're maybe tired and losing steam and feeling exhausted, instead of, this approach that can happen in the hospital system of like, oh, it's a bit hard, I'm too tired as the midwife with all these other women to deal with, I'd rather just give her epidural at this point. Like, at least she'll be quiet for a while and get a rest, and I can attend to everybody else, rather than, someone who is given the time and space in their practice to actually be with you and help you get over that little hump, and then bang, you start pushing and it's all nearly over. So, someone who really understands where you're nearly at. They really know what a woman's body looks like through the different stages just before they're happening. It's like, you're so close. I swear you're so close. And, just to hear that can just help you get through that, if you are finding it difficult. So, that continuity of carer, and a carer with the right experience. So, a midwife who knows about the physiology of birth, or a surgeon who's really good at surgery. You choose the right person, and you want continuity. But so it's sad that only around 8% of Australian women have access to that in the hospital system. Generally, women are having to work with a team of midwives, and they don't know who's going to be on duty that night they go into labour. So that's unfortunate. But you can bring some continuity of care to your experience through engaging a doula, for example. or finding a student midwife who, as part of her training, needs to follow a woman through the course of her pregnancy.
Yep.
And you can contact the closest university to you that might, you know, have a midwifery program and students that you could be put in contact with, I suppose. So, yeah, just look for ways to bring some continuity, because that is going to set you up best, not only for the birth, but then there's the whole postpartum period after that, the breastfeeding experience, everything else, you know. So continuity really is the key. But if you can't find that, and you're finding yourself having to justify your choices, the important thing to remember is, you know, and the staff themselves forget this, they don't think about this, there is no one else who is more invested in the safe arrival of this baby than the woman herself. No one else is laying their own future and current health prospects on the line. Only the woman is doing that. That is how much she cares about this baby. So, you know, when they, you know, decide to argue with your decisions, if you remember that, I think that's something that can really sort of give you strength, because they forget that. And, you know, and they don't, and I get, you know, they do work in a high stress situation. In fact, I think I told you this the other day, Alicia, there was a study by a few years back now by Marilyn Ferrer, Professor Marilyn Ferrer, who's at the University of Technology in Sydney, I think. She's been around a long time and been behind some really wonderful studies. And she has done a lot of work into the birth environment and what sorts of things are important for maintaining that sense of feeling private, safe and unobserved, and best release of hormones and so on. And these findings were then applied to different hospitals, I think like the birth centre at Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney, to make the design more birth friendly. One of the things they were doing was that they were testing, there's a simple test you can do with a little mouth swab to test for cortisol levels. And they were testing the cortisol levels of women in birth spaces, but also staff. And they found that the sight of stainless steel, even just looking at stainless steel and tiling, elevated the cortisol levels in labouring women. And
we know that cortisol
when
is a
cortisol
stress
goes up,
hormone.
we do need cortisol actually at the very end as we're pushing, really actively pushing. But you don't want cortisol, you know, in the earlier labour process. That shuts everything down. So, yeah, it was really interesting for her to discover that even looking at stainless steel and tiles provoked that response. But not just in the birthing women, but in the staff who work there every single day. So everybody is potentially stressed. And if you've got your nice, lovely lights and maybe a little bit of very quiet music, I don't know, I never wanted music, but, you know, whatever it is to try and soften the environment, the staff will feel that too. So there's a lot you can do, even if you can't find continuity of care. But I do encourage you to try and, as your first step, to just really try and find continuity so that you avoid strangers, so that it doesn't, you know, get monkey mind going and shutting off your birth hormones when it comes.
And I've actually done I've done a recording with a student midwife, and we have spoken all about how to go about finding one and where to find one. So I think that episode will be out soon. So therefore that will be great for women who are, you know, they're getting pregnant, they are pregnant. It's never too late to hire a student midwife. They're usually really happy to, even for you to hire them at the latest stage in your pregnancy before baby is here. So definitely continuity of care and knowing your power, trusting your body, trusting your intuition. And it's really hard to not have, someone named it the good girl syndrome, which is when we just say yes. We don't want to be difficult. We don't want to be annoying, questioning, taking up time. But it's our care on the line. It's our health. It's our baby's health. We don't have to be a good girl. And what I mean also is, if we question, that doesn't make us a bad girl in a sense. It makes us informed. And that is that is everything. You need to be informed for every aspect of your health. We're not just talking about pregnancy, because even if you have you've got broken bones, you've got a fracture of your leg, and you need to be treated, you definitely want to be informed about your choices there. You definitely want to know what options you have and how that leg is going to heal. So being informed, being an actor, you're the one who's making decisions. The healthcare staff is not making decisions for you. They are telling you options. Sometimes they are forgetting some options, I feel, and that's where I like to question more and say, let's double check there isn't an option that you're not hiding from me, but you haven't told me about, because that none of those options suit me. It's about, questioning, you have a voice, use it. And yes, it can feel so daunting. I've been there as a first-time mom, and it's super daunting, and you feel like you're really annoying and like, oh, who am I? I don't even know birth. No, but you know your body, and that is all that you need to know. Yes, you maybe don't know about birth yet. Who cares? The midwife doesn't know about your body yet. She's, telling you how to go about your birth. So what's the difference there? Just trust yourself, trust your instincts, and speak up. Use your voice. And if you can't do it, your birth partner is the person that will be relaying that message and will be your voice during, the labor process and the birth process. I think we've spoken for 2 hours now. I think I've taken plenty of your time.
We've certainly covered a lot of ground. Yep. There's probably two things that I've thought to just two links that I could tell you about. I think it's useful for partners to learn a little bit of something about birth and to not just think that their only job is to drive you to the hospital, because there is such a thing as precipitous birth, like a sudden birth, where you could find yourself attending the birth of your own baby and not have any idea and be freaking out and thinking you need to cut the cord and do all this stuff. It's so what we did at Maternity Choices a couple of years ago, it was about 18 months ago, during the floods here in this region in northern New South Wales, or maybe it was during the bushfires or something, I can't remember, but a little while back we published a information page about unassisted birth and how to, what to do if you find yourself attending birth, because we should all know that. We should all know. I didn't really know. So, there's actually a whole old book that is copied. You can read this just a little book about what to do, because there can be any number of things, not just fast birth, but also phone lines down, bushfire, roads blocked, floods, roads blocked, your car's broken down, any number of things. So your partner should at least know that. And I think that bit of information alleviates some of their general fear as well, and just has them feeling a little bit like, okay, I know sort of 3 or 4 basic things. If for whatever reason we find ourselves in the driveway having to just deal with it.
Thank you so much, Sally. That's been an enlightening episode, and there's been so many great resources that I will actually list, as I edit this episode and I go back through. I will add to the show notes, because there's been a lot of resources that we have mentioned. And for those who are listening and they're driving, or you can't take notes while you're listening to your podcast, they will all be in the show notes. So you can just go back and there'll be a link there to most of the resources we've spoken about. So, well, thank you, Sally. And thank you. It's been so good. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to get notified of when a new episode comes out, please subscribe to this show on your podcast listening platform. Also, I would really appreciate it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcast or share this episode so that other moms can find it. If you would like to tell your own pregnancy, birth, or parenting story, please head to the show notes and you will find a form there to get in touch with me. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will be with you again next week for a new episode.